what's up? My name is John Bonjour. I am a comic artist and film enthusiast. I have not drawn any art for this movie, but that is not a reflection of how I feel about it. I've just been watching a lot of movies and I don't have time. But I would love to enthuse about the film Conclave. And before I do, if you haven't seen it and you plan to watch it, or if you plan to watch it again, I cannot recommend highly enough pairing this with a nice red wine. Game changer. Fundamentally a different movie. So Conclave was directed by Edward Berger and it stars Ralph Fiennes as Cardinal Lawrence. Essentially the plot of the movie is the Pope has died and a group of the Catholic cardinals need to all come together as a conclave and try to elect a new pope. It's a wild movie. It plays in so many different spaces. It feels like a political thriller. It feels satirical sometimes. It feels like a whodunit for a lot of the movie. It was nominated for Best Picture, which this year kind of doesn't mean anything, but in this case, I think they did a really good job, and I'm glad they did because I probably never would have watched this movie. We'll get to my thoughts on this vis-a-vis the Oscars very soon, but for now I just want to highlight some of the things I thought they did really well, a couple of things that maybe don't work, a few spoilers toward the end, and then we'll get into that. The best thing about this movie, and that's a pretty high bar, is the story. The characters, the way that it unfolds, this framing around Ralph Fiennes' character, who is a man who has lost or is losing his faith as he's tasked with keeping the faith alive, is so intrinsically interesting to me. This is a movie that lives and dies in tiny, small glimpses and moments and little looks and very minute deliveries of lines. It's not bombastic for the majority of the runtime, so anytime that it is, it has to really stand out, and anytime that it's not, that subtlety has to be there. Ralph Fiennes is obviously amazing, but everybody else in this movie also really brings it. I don't know if that's up to direction or the cast or both, but there is just something special about how connected this movie feels to itself. It feels like a movie that should be boring. I think that's the thing that I was most taken by from this movie. I should have been bored, and I don't know if it's a sign of my maturity or the movie's, but I wasn't bored for a single second of this. It's relatively long. The majority of it takes place in 1 or 2 rooms. Most of it is just people talking. That should be boring to me, a guy who likes Marvel movies. The fact that I was riveted this entire runtime is crazy. And I think that is hugely due to the cast. I think that's a lot due to the story. I also think the music plays a fundamental role in my interest in this movie. There is a heartbeat to the film. There's a rhythm and a pace that most movies just straight don't have. The music is beautiful, it's rhythmic, it's concerning, there's an undertone of anxiety and fear and depth there that I think works really well through the movie. And they make it so clear that they know exactly what they're doing with that pace and tone and rhythm, because the title card of the movie is placed over a close-up shot of the Pope's body bumping rhythmically up against the car or like hearse or whatever you call that. I love the placement of title cards. That is a huge, weird passion of mine, but this one is particularly interesting to me because that rhythmic bumping up against the thing as the car is moving back and forth, it creates this heartbeat, which is just that dissonance of a heartbeat being created by a corpse is so interesting to me. It's so good, and it's just like such a... You would expect the title card in this movie, and I know I'm spending so much time on this, but you would expect the title card in this movie to be placed over some big ornate shot of a tapestry or the Sistine Chapel or some fancy big architectural thing, or like one of the cardinals in their big red robes against a white background. You expect it to be something flashier, I guess. So starting with something so organic and interesting and dark instead of those loud, bright moments that you would kind of expect, it sets a really weird tone for the movie, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. That said, another thing that does work incredibly well in this film is the imagery. There is so much lonely, brutal, stark, cold imagery. It's all isolating. It's not super bright and exciting. The only bright colors we get are the red of the cardinals' robes, which is very interesting through the whole movie. The way that they frame that, the way that they include that coloring is really cool. But also, I love that it's not bright and exciting. It creates this tone, this feeling of darkness and seclusion, and everyone is on their own trying to figure out if they need to be fighting to be the Pope and if they need to be voting for the right guy and who should be the next person. Everyone is on their own little island, to the point where there's a couple of shots in the movie where the room is full of people and they decide to remove them all just so that we get a shot of each individual character. And I think that is so interesting. I think they do such a really just an amazing job of showing how isolated all of these people are, even though they're all together all trying to do something for the greater good of what they believe. There's this overhead shot where there's a bunch of people with umbrellas and they just all sort of filter down around this fountain. Stunning. It's beautiful. There's also a really notable moment that I can't really talk about yet, but we'll get to that in the spoiler section. But like I said before, this movie doesn't work without a good story. A good looking movie can be great. A good sounding movie can be awesome, but the story needs to keep you invested. And this is a movie that 100% does, at least for me. Now, I will say I'm a man of faith. I am not Catholic, but I'm Christian, so there's a lot of, the Venn diagram is pretty much a circle. They're very close. But as a person who believes in God, it was really interesting to see the way that this movie presents faith. I am so used to faith-based movies being like, God's not dead, which is just awful filmmaking. It's just almost all of the Christian movies that are out there, and it makes me sad because lots of creative Christians exist and lots of really amazing artists are Christian. I don't know why we can't seem to make one good movie. But things like the God's Not Dead movies, where Christians are presented as these perfect people who, yeah, they have flaws, but their flaws are sometimes they're shouty. And then the heathens in the world are presented as these drug-dealing, sex-addicted monsters. I hate that. I hate those kinds of movies. I hate things that are just preaching to the same choir and not really trying to make any kind of point. And I specifically hate it when it goes directly against the religion that you claim to be a part of. That's not the point of this video. The point here is that Conclave does a really good job presenting faith as this living, breathing, organic thing where human, flawed people mess up and try to do better. And that to me rings true for what faith actually is. It's this group of very, very flawed people, aware of their flaws, trying to do better because they know that there is better and they've been saved by better. That's beautiful. And I think Conclave does a really good job of showing Ralph Fiennes' character, who is kind of the anchor point of this movie. Yes, he's the protagonist, but also I think from the thematic angle, he is pivotal to this movie because he is struggling with his faith. He's trying to figure all of that out, figure out where he lands on so many of these things. He wants to leave at least this level of the Catholic Church. So he's clearly in a place of struggle, which I can fully relate to, but it's interesting seeing him being placed as the manager of this whole thing, trying to keep everybody on the same track and find something for the greater good of this religion that he might not even fully be invested in. I love that the movie, while doing other things, is really just about him discovering all of these hidden dark secrets of these people, accepting them, loving them, and realizing that they still can't be the right person. He's still disappointed by all of these people. The truth of humanity is so disappointing to this character because he wants to find an example of this perfect person that he wants there to be, and he knows that it's not actually possible. Which is so interesting, especially when you get to that final twist, which I guess we're getting to. So some spoilers for the movie. One, I thought it was really interesting just politically through the whole movie, how each character was trying to pretend like they didn't really want to be the Pope, but clearly they were showing that they really did want to be the Pope. I like that this movie has an understanding. I like that the internal logic of this movie, whether you believe in Christianity or Catholicism or a God at all, the internal logic of this movie is to suggest that there is a God and that there is a right choice and a plan for what's going on. But I think it's interesting that they don't have any huge, miraculous events that show some blinding light. There's one moment that was the visual element I was talking about, which is when Ralph Fiennes' character is about to vote for himself. And he puts the vote in and the ceiling explodes and there's bright light coming, there's a beam of light coming down, and it's this beautiful image paired with this dark moment where you're trying to figure out, it's confusing, it's scary, you're not sure what's going on. And I think that is the most act of God thing in this movie, which for a movie about a bunch of people who believe in God is kind of surprising and kind of interesting. And it's especially interesting when you later find out that that was an act of someone else who believes in a fundamentally different God. I think that dissonance is so interesting. The movie itself is trying to reconcile with the idea that there are a bunch of people who believe in a bunch of different religions, and also this religion is important to the movie and they need to figure out how to solve the problem of this movie, which is find the new Pope. All of that to say, the whole movie, Ralph Fiennes' character is disappointed by people constantly, over and over, finding new secrets, revealing darkness about themselves, and then they finally elect a pope. He thinks everything is great and perfect, and there's this beautiful shining moment of happiness, which is immediately torn away from him. One of his advisors tells him that there was some sort of secret going on, and you feel that drop in his heart of knowing that there's another secret. We might have just elected somebody who's got some deep, terrible, horrible secret. And when he goes in and talks to that character, the twist of having him have ovaries and sort of both sets of male and female parts, which is a thing that goes sort of against the Catholic Church, which is supposed to elect an exclusively male pope. It feels kind of out of nowhere, but also with the context of the movie, this idea that he is constantly disappointed, seeing these secrets, and then finding a secret about this guy that is then revealed to be the thing that makes his faith the strongest. I think that's just incredible. I could talk about that for hours. The point being, this story is solid. The themes are rock solid. It is so fundamentally interesting and an interesting examination of faith that doesn't require you to be part of the choir that it's preaching to. It's not preaching to anybody. It's bringing up questions, asking things. There's a great quote from the director of Emilia Perez where he's like, "Oh, cinema's not supposed to answer questions. It's supposed to ask questions. And if we didn't ask the right questions, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way," or whatever the hell he said. But this is an example of a movie that asks questions. This is an example of film that raises interesting topics and plays with them, discusses them, examines them, and doesn't always come to a fully fledged point on them, but it brings up a case for humanity. It brings up a case for faith. It brings up a case for forgiveness and understanding, and also it brings up a case for who we elect as leaders and who we choose to follow. There's so many interesting things that this movie brings up. I love that this movie examines those people, not as characters, not as representatives of a religion, but as people. That is what makes this movie work. It's an examination of character, and not trying to make a point about you should be Catholic, and not trying to make a point about God is ridiculous and you shouldn't believe in him. It's trying to examine a group of people in a stressful situation that are all part of this faith and trying to band together and figure out what to do. So there you go. That's my thoughts on Conclave. I think it's riveting. I think it's fundamentally interesting. It does a really interesting job of being a faith movie without being a faith movie. I think it's one of the best movies we've gotten this year. I absolutely adore it. I think if there's anything that doesn't work, there are a few things. There's just some fat on the movie that I think you could trim. A couple of moments where they cut away from things that I think would have been more interesting than the things they don't cut away from, which you could argue is a stylistic decision. But other than that, I mean, the score works, the acting works, the writing is great. Most of this movie, 98% of this movie is absolutely incredible. So yeah, in terms of the Oscars, I think this absolutely should have a shot at Best Picture. I don't know that it'll win. I would be kind of surprised if it did. I think it doesn't have that flashy sort of bombastic thing that a lot of the Oscars movies are looking for. I put very little stock in what actually wins. It's interesting to look at, it's interesting to analyze, and it gets me to watch some movies I probably wouldn't have before. But I don't really care who wins. I would not mind. I would not be upset if Conclave won. I think it is a fantastic movie. I think it's well worth your time, no matter where you stand on faith, no matter where you stand on God, no matter where you stand on movies that you think are probably going to be boring. I think Conclave is one of the most riveting movies we've gotten this year. So you should definitely check it out if you haven't. And if you have, what did you think of the movie? I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching this video and checking out my channel. If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on movies, faith, I guess, although probably not really the direction I'm going to take this channel most of the time, comics, art, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, and comment down below what you'd like me to review next, or do none of those things because I am not your dad.